I'm Lisa.
And I'm Sean.
We're a married couple, and we like to talk about
The Beach Boys. Oh, hi, everybody. I didn't see you there. This is Sean.
And Lisa.
And I guess we're Tune X Podcast. Oh, what a day. What a day. How are you, dear?
Oh, just peachy. Well, within a 5-day weekend, so...
Yeah, rub it in. Yeah, we're not going to get into that right now because, there's so much to say about that. Part of that weekend involved going to my mother's house. Sadly, my dad died earlier this year, and my mother's been doing a lot of cleanup. And in that cleanup, she's been handing me stuff every time I go see her. And I'm going to show you one of the things that she handed me. It's this issue, and I'll hold it up to the microphone for all to see, of New Times, dated April 2nd, 1976. And all over the front page, we have the Beach Boys. Well, 4 of them.
Very bearded Beach Boys.
Very bearded and very Brian-less. These are nice pictures of them, I have to say, though. They all look pretty good.
And I love how on the back of the magazine, turn the back of the magazine to my way, there's a big old cigarette ad for more cigarettes.
Yep.
Back when, well, there is a Surgeon General warning at the bottom, but It's not like nowadays where a cigarette ad is 2 couples running through a waterfall.
Yeah.
And like this gigantic warning that smoking causes like your head to explode or something.
Yeah, and the thing is, keeping in mind that the issue date is April 2nd, in magazine world, the date published on the front cover is essentially an expiration date. So this thing likely came out sometime in March of 1976. So this was before the whole Brian's Back thing, and before rock and roll music was released as a single. So it's basically about the Beach Boys. Hey, did you know they're still touring? And that was pretty much it. And half the article is about TM. So they're like, oh, yeah, we've been working on an album for the past 3 years. I want to know what that album was.
Yeah.
I took a quick gander at the art. It's very interesting. I don't remember ever having this magazine, but apparently it was in my bedroom when I moved out. So I don't know.
For those who don't know, Sean's parents' former house was a very old, it was built, 1869 or something?
Something like that.
Like, seriously, I'm not even exaggerating. It was from well back into the 1800s. And houses like that tend to have all kinds of things left in nooks and crannies and closets that may have been forgotten by previous owners or tenants, and you never know what you're going to find. So that could have been something that was stuck in the floorboards of your old bedroom. And
and it just happened to have the Beach Boys on the cover.
Well, you never know.
A huge cover picture. It makes you think the entire issue is about the Beach Boys, but only about 2 pages in the whole thing. And what was really weird was opened...
Let me see it.
Okay, yeah, you take a look at it. Good luck finding the article. But when I opened it, I opened to this article about how there are 2 different senators getting hair plugs. One of them was Joe Biden, and he looks really weird in there.
Well, he was only
He was 32, I think.
Oh, God, here's another cigarette ad.
There are cigarette ads on every other page of that thing.
It's some guy. Yeah, you're going to have to scan this in and put in on the notes.
The show notes? Oh, man.
It's this guy, pulling a Winston out of the pack, and he looks like he's going to beat somebody up. And, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's the picture of Biden. He has, no hair. And Henry Kissinger looking exactly the same. That dude does not age ever.
I know. Good Lord.
This is it's like People magazine for boring people.
You mean People magazine? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
There's an article about Gerald Ford. I don't know what this thing is.
So while Lisa's thumbing
here's another cigarette ad.
I told you, there's a cigarette ad like every other page. So anyway, friends, while Lisa is going through that magazine, I'm going to just catch up with a little bit of feedback we got. Lewis in Nashville wrote to us. Hi, Lewis. And we had mentioned in episode 3, was it 3, I think, when we were talking about, I don't remember what we were talking about because I have podcast amnesia. But I had mentioned that when Brian Wilson's band did Funky Pretty, they were doing it album style, despite my preference for the concert version, the 1973 in-concert version. Lewis informed me that they did actually perform it at least once in the style of how it was performed in Beach Boys in concert. And he sent me a link to, I think it's a London performance. And I will be happy to share that with you, the listeners. So,
ooh.
But in the meantime, speaking of concerts,
that's our topic.
That's our topic. So thank you, Lewis, not only for that information, but also for that easy segue there. Lisa and I each have seen the Beach Boys in concert in 3 different formations. And the one thing, though, as Beach Boys fans that we really, really, really wanted, just like most other Beach Boys fans, was an opportunity to see Brian Wilson, which when we first saw the Beach Boys, you first saw them, what, 89?
89 and 90.
Yeah, and I first saw them in 96. And we were just both resigned to this idea that we're just never going to see Brian because he's Brian, he's secluded, self-secluded, I should say, and he'd never do a concert.
Well, to be fair, one of those years, I have the program, and Brian was pictured in the program.
Yeah.
And I think on that tour, he may have done a few shows, but he was not an active part of the tour.
Sure. I mean, it wasn't unheard of him to join the Beach Boys on stage. That was not unheard of. It was just not very common.
Yeah. So we never thought we would even see Brian. And then things came about when he started doing more work on his own, when he put out the Imagination album in 1998, there was a concert. He did do a show, and it was right here in Illinois, wasn't it?
It was in St. Charles, where he had his second home.
Yeah. And that show, among other people, featured Timothy B. Schmidt.
Yep.
And
Bruce Johnston.
Bruce Johnston was there. And several people who went on to work with Brian in later years.
I think so. I think they had Scott Bennett and Paul Mertens. I might be wrong about that, though. But I'm pretty sure they were both on the album, at least.
So it was like, okay. And then in 1999, we in the fan community got wind of Brian doing a tour. A tour.
Yeah.
And we bought tickets because there were tickets that went on sale.
Beacon Theater, February 24th.
Yes, which got canceled. But
well, it wasn't canceled as it was postponed. Yeah,
there were several shows, and I believe that was going to be the start of the tour. There were several shows that were canceled but immediately rescheduled. There was a family emergency in, I believe, one of Melinda's relatives, and they made it they put out the word immediately and made it clear that these shows were going to happen. They were just being pushed to June because of availability. So it was almost like whoever was doing the PR and arranging these things wanted to assure the fans that this was not Brian backing out of anything.
Right.
So it was good to know that right away because we were kind of skeptical. We were a little edgy about this.
Mm-hmm.
But then the tour did start. I think it started in Minneapolis or somewhere in the Midwest.
It was Michigan, actually.
Okay. And I know Chicago was one of the first shows.
Oh, Rosemont, really. But,
hush.
Who's counting?
Hush. And then June came around, and there were shows that happened, and then we finally had our chance. So it was June 18th, 1999, Paul McCartney's birthday, at the Beacon Theater in New York City. Before that show, we got together with some of our fan friends from the New York area. We had dinner at a nice place called John's Pizza. There are several locations in New York, but this one happened to be pretty close to the Beacon. And we all sat at the table kind of going, all right, this is going to happen? Even at dinner,
we were edgy.
We were still, even though Brian had been doing shows and there were no bad reports, we were still like, is this real?
And the thing is, this was the first show of the rescheduled leg. So there was still that possibility. It's like, oh, he's been away for a while. Maybe he's going to regress and not want to do the show.
Yeah.
And of course, we were all saying, at least to ourselves, it's okay if he doesn't. We understand.
Well, yeah, you can't be a Brianista without a level of understanding.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he's going to come out on stage and give everybody big warm hugs and do a song and dance routine and be a tumbler and all that. Like, that's just not Brian.
No.
You have to accept...
He's no Robert Goulet, as he himself said.
You have to accept the Brian that you get. So, we go into the Beacon, and we took our seats.
What did Carol's husband say to us when we got to when we got there?
Which one of you was dragged here? As if.
Oh boy.
So we took our seats, and the lights went down, and there was an intro film done by the great Alan Boyd.
And I should say that the intro film was introduced by Steve Dahl, which personally to me was really weird because he walks out on stage. I was like, wait, what's Steve doing here? I really did think I was in Chicago for a moment because Steve Dahl is a fixture in Chicago radio. I did not like Steve Dahl. I preferred his partner, Gary Meyer, ex-partner. But I was like, Steve! And I actually yelled, where's Gary? When he took the stage. And he said, all right, everybody, we're going to show you a short film. It's about Brian. It has nothing you don't already know, but we think you'll like it anyway.
And keep in mind, the New York audience has no idea who this guy in a Hawaiian shirt is. Like who is this person? We have absolutely no idea. So the film was a montage of clips, little performance clips, interviews, and all different things. It's absolutely wonderful, and unfortunately has never been released on any kind of medium just simply because of the licensing that would be required is just prohibitive. But it was a treat for those of us in the audience. And I do clearly remember it ended with audio from the Little Girl I Once Knew session, where they count in, Brian counts in, and there's a blown take, and then there's a count in again, and the band starts.
The live band on stage, we should say.
The live band starts the intro, and Brian jogged out, and everybody just...
The place exploded. I'm sure I saw grown men sobbing.
Well, I mean, the way I like to describe it, and I've said this before, that it was an exchange of love from the audience to the stage and back. It was like how you have to believe in Tinkerbell in order for her to exist. It felt like we had to believe in Brian in order for him to exist on that stage. It was almost tangible, just the love we were feeling for him. And I hope to God he felt even just a fraction of what we were sending out to him. It was amazing. And during the show, I'm thinking that this was just going to be a one-off thing, that Brian was just going to do that tour, and that was going to be the end of that, and we'd never see him again.
I remember after the show was over, I said, well, this is the one and only time we're ever going to see this show. He's never going to want to do this again.
And I'm even thinking of, like, the songs we're not going to hear Heroes and Villains. We're not going to hear Surf's Up. And I mean, I think... See, I'm a sucker for spoilers, so I'm sure I had looked at posts on Pet Sound's mailing list or other forums, to see the set list. So I'm sure I knew what was being played. So I knew what we weren't going to be hearing. But that show was just absolutely magical.
Oh, yeah.
And that started us on a journey that still, as far as we know, is still continuing, because we just saw Brian a couple weeks ago in Waukegan, and that was our 31st time seeing him.
Yeah.
So we've been thinking about all these different shows we've seen in different locations with different people, different things that were memorable about the venue, about the city, because we have traveled to some shows.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing you're not going to hear us talk about is first of all, the Smile concerts, because that's in our episode about Smile.
Coming up in the future.
And we're also not going to talk about the tribute to Brian Wilson that was done at Radio City Music Hall in 2001, because there's so much to talk about that merits its own episode.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are a couple of things I do want to mention really quickly about this first show we went to that just really stick out. I remember when they did Lay Down Burden, before they started doing it, Brian said that he's going to have a hard time singing it because it makes him think of Carl. And then after he did it, he said, "Thank you all for listening." And I remember that in the first leg of the tour, he was doing This Could Be the Night by Harry Nilsson. Why? Because Phil Spector produced it, of course. But by the time it came around to us, they had taken that song out and replaced it with Add Some Music. And I remember Brian said, "Okay, everybody, it's really important that you pay attention to the words on this song." So, I'm paying attention. Ooh, dentist chair. Yes. There was one other thing. Oh, remember back home when he had us all clap on the fours and we realized that is hard to do, just clapping on the fours. 1, 2, 3, clap. 1, 2, 3. And finally, Caroline No. We expected Brian to do Caroline No the way he did it, and I just wasn't made for these times. When at the very end, instead of belting it out at a high note, he just go, "Oh, Caroline, no." But the thing is, he went for the high note. Mm-hmm. His voice cracked at first, but then after he kind of got his footing, he held it out, and he got it. He got it. We were like, whoa.
Well, yeah, I mean, starting with that show and going over the next couple of years, we saw a lot of growth and development. Because remember, even back in the Beach Boys' active touring days, Brian was never front and center.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike was really the front man, and Brian would play the bass and he'd sing lead, but he didn't really connect with the audience, or he was more a guy in the band than the star of the show. I think it took him some time to kind of learn what he wanted to do, how he wanted to do it, find his comfort zone. Of course, this will probably be the first of many shout outs to his band, but I think his outstanding band did an extraordinary job of making him feel comfortable and loved and supported. We're talking about men who are fans.
Yeah.
Some of them lifelong fans of this music. And they were all in for Brian. I mean, they could not have been a better support for him.
I'm telling you.
And I think that's what gave Brian a lot of confidence and courage over the next, because by the time Smile came around, we saw a much more relaxed, confident Brian. So I think his band did a great deal to make him feel like they were there for him and they were going to take care of him. And they did. I mean, there were times, I'll admit it, in those early concerts, times that Brian missed a lyric or came in late, and the other guys could scoop him up and keep things on track, and which couldn't have been easy for them, but they did it.
Yep, they supported him, and the audience supported him, because I remember at that Beacon show, just about every single song, standing ovation.
Oh my God. We had to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there he was, right there. Like, he was there. I mean, Sean and I had both seen him in person at our respective meet and greets, Sean in Chicago and mine in New York, meet and greets that he did to promote Imagination.
Yeah.
But that was just a couple minutes in a record store. Here he was on stage singing these songs that we love so much, that he wrote and produced. So, I mean, it was just mind-blowing.
You know what was even more mind-blowing?
What?
When the tour was over and we were all like, oh, that was so great that we got a chance to see Brian. Now we have something to remember for the rest of our lives. A few months goes by, and then what happened? What did they announce?
A Pet Sounds tour.
A Pet Sounds tour.
It was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Really? Is this happening?
Pet Sounds in its entirety with an orchestra.
Yes. Plus other songs. It wasn't like they just did Pet Sounds. So we saw 2 shows on that tour. We first went to, we had bought tickets for the Garden State Arts Center in Holmdel, and that show wasn't until later in the tour in September. And we realized we're not going to wait that long. So we bought tickets for another show that was much earlier in the tour. In fact, I think it was like maybe the 3rd date on the whole tour.
It was pretty early, yeah.
At the Mann Music Center in Philadelphia. But the Garden State Arts Center show was great for so many reasons. Because first of all, we got together with, again, our band of usual suspects from the New York area.
Mm-hmm.
We went to met up at TGI Fridays in nearby Hazlitt, and a couple British fans who had come over joined up with us. They had just come from the sound check, so they
remember
joined.
How ecstatic they were. We just heard the sound check. It's gonna be incredible.
Yeah, so there were like 25 of us.
I remember one of them was Mark Service. I don't remember who the other guy was.
Yes, and I think they pushed together like 6 or 7 tables for all of us. We have pictures that we took. We even got our waitress in the photo.
Yes.
And we headed over to the art center. At the art center, the parking is free, but there's a lot closer to the venue and then an overflow lot that's a bit of a distance away, still walkable, but they provide school buses that'll take you right up to the front gate.
Yeah, these weird dark green things.
So we're on the bus with some of our friends, and, well, you take it from here.
Okay.
Because you can do it more justice than I can.
Oh, thank you. We're loaded on this bus, and our friend David Imponderables Feldman just had this look on his face that he seemed kind of, I don't know how to describe it. He seemed kind of weirded out by the whole thing. Meanwhile, Jack Madani, if I can drop his whole name here, he, on multiple times during that bus trip, had to say 1 step, 2 step, talk about a new step, because, what's his name? Peter Baggy, I think his name was, had just released The Murray Wilson Show, Rock and Roll Dad.
I'm a genius too, you know!
And that's the same guy who did the artwork on George Faulkner's album, George Faulkner Sings Murray Wilson, which I highly recommend if you can find a copy. It was very limited. But yeah, we were on that weird bus.
To me, it's like if you've ever watched Ren and Stimpy, it was kind of like the Croco Stimpy bus, where we all should have just been hanging out the windows going, happy, happy, joy, joy.
Good Lord.
That's a really old reference.
I remember at the show, now, something that I have this ability to do, at least I did back then, I don't know if I still have the ability, I could spot and identify an Oasis fan a mile away. There was a certain look and vibe to him. Honest to God, with my wife and sitting across from me as my witness, I've actually gone up to people and said, "Excuse me, are you an Oasis fan? Just curious." The answer was always, "Yes, I am."
It was like the hair and the glasses, you know.
So before the show started, I'm just kind of looking around. We're at our seats, and I was looking around, and a couple of rows back, I spot an Oasis fan, of course. And I thought to myself, that Oasis fan kind of looks a little like Sean Lennon. And that was it. That's all I thought. I also remember our friend Craig introducing us to Dennis Dykin from the Smithereens. And from that point on, anytime we've ever been at a New York area show, I could spot Dennis Dykin a mile away because he's freaking tall and he wears unique clothing, so he's easy to spot. But I remember during intermission, I had to go use the facilities, as many people do during intermission. And as I'm walking to the facilities, the Oasis fan that I spotted ran past me, almost elbowing me on his way also to the facilities. But I get into the men's room, and I hear a lot of people muttering, "Sean Lennon, Sean Lennon, Sean Lennon, Sean Lennon." And I said, "Wait, what? What? No."
Yeah.
And I step outside, and there he is. There's the Oasis fan, just waiting outside the men's room. And then a Japanese conceptual artist comes out of the ladies' room, and I heard the voice say, "Oh, there you are." It was Sean Lennon.
It was Sean Lennon.
Sean Lennon.
And we had better seats.
We had better seats than the offspring of John Lennon.
But yeah, I mean, Sean Lennon is a huge Brianista, and that was a show very convenient to Manhattan. So it made perfect sense for him and other New Yorkers to be there. Another cool thing about that show was that on New Jersey 101.5, which is to this day still talk radio on weekdays and music on weekends, the afternoon drive time talent, DJs, hosts, whatever you call them. I don't know what you call them if they don't play music, because they're not a DJ if they don't play music.
I know, they're hosts.
But yeah, so the hosts were, at that time, this duo, Scott and Casey. And when the Art Center schedule had come out back in the spring, they were thrilled to see that Brian and Pet Sounds were on the list, and they went to the show.
Yeah, I think Casey and his wife were supposed to go, but Casey's wife got sick, so Scott went in her place.
Yeah, so it was cool to hear them talk about the show leading up to it and also afterwards. Like, that was, when you go through your life not hearing a lot about Brian or about the Beach Boys or a lot of misconceptions, it just feels really good to hear not just promotion, because they didn't have to talk about it. Like, they're just talking about it in the course of their show. And that was pretty awesome.
And they also had a follow-up story that I'm not going to get into right now because it would just take too long.
Yeah,
but
it's not very good.
Oh, I think it is a good story.
No, it's not.
But I do want to share it with people, so I'll type it up on the blog at tunex.fab4it.com. Keep your eye out on there if you want the story, and I'll put it up there sometime after this episode is out. But any other thoughts on...
Well, I mean, the show itself. I mean, they started with just a standard Beach Boys focused set. And then after the intermission, there was the orchestral part and Pet Sounds. So you started with the orchestra playing an overture of...
The whole show started with that.
Oh, okay. Oh, so there was the overture first, and then...
The overture, and then the standard set, and then Pet Sounds.
But then when Pet Sounds began, now you had this orchestra, which, as often happens when you have like a pop act with an orchestra, the orchestras are locally hired. They don't travel. It's not like a set orchestra that travels with the band, because you can imagine that is crazy expensive. So they hire a local orchestra and send them the music and everything they need to know, and they have to be ready by the night of the show. And this is something that happens all the time with all different artists. So it's a pretty standard practice. But there was also Brian's band. And let's be honest, the orchestra was nice and provided a lot of great moments, but Brian's band itself, again, here's another accolade for them. They could play all of Pet Sounds without needing an orchestra. Like, they know their stuff, and they're multi-instrumentalists. I mean, they could have done it without the orchestra, and they have done it since then without the orchestra.
And quite honestly, the orchestra didn't really add much, because you could barely hear them except during the quiet part and I'm Waiting for the Day.
Yeah.
And maybe Don't Talk, but that was it. Otherwise, you could hardly hear them at all.
But it still, I mean, it just made it feel very special and very elevated. Like, this is Pet Sounds. This is something that must be taken seriously. And when you have that, especially in that tour, this is not like people up dancing and throwing beach balls around like a Beach Boys concert kind of thing. This was like people listening to something like the New York Philharmonic at Avery Fisher Hall. I mean, I remember...
Except the acoustics are much better here.
I remember sitting in our, in the front section of the Art Center and just kind of looking off to my right and basically seeing like a wall of faces, like everybody just sitting there and taking it in. Was it Rob McCabe who said that?
I was about to think that,
He said, a Beach Boys concert is a party. A Brian concert is church.
Yes.
And I mean church in that you are having a spiritual experience. And I mean, they started, of course, with Wouldn't It Be Nice, which we had heard them do already in concert. So that wasn't like a huge surprise. But when they went on to the next song, You Still Believe in Me. And when it sounded exactly like the record, I mean, people gasped.
You could hear...
Yeah. And that wasn't the only time. Like when
Sloop John B, even that common song, just the beginning of that, people are like,
yeah, I mean, it was just because also I know since then there have been a lot of like, let's tour the album kind of concerts that many artists have done. And we've seen, like we saw Stevie Wonder do Songs in the Key of Life.
We saw Roger Daltrey do Tommy.
Yeah. So it's become much more common nowadays to have like, let's recreate this studio experience live on stage. But back in 2000, I think that was still kind of a new thing. So it wasn't something you were really used to hearing.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, one of the reasons why the Beatles stopped touring is because they knew that it would have been back then it would have been nearly impossible to recreate Sgt. Pepper live.
Yeah.
Now you can do it.
Yeah.
With synthesizers and electronic things and computers.
Or even with actual musicians,
well,
too.
That too. But I'm saying that the technology has advanced so much that you can definitely make it possible without having a stage full of musicians.
Yeah.
But for a long time, it's like the live experience was supposed to be different from the album. But then it became, let's recreate the studio experience live on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian's band did an extraordinary job of that. So again, there were probably people who wept. And I may have been one of them.
I might have been one of them too.
Because something that gets me every time I have heard Pet Sounds performed live, no matter where we are, at the end, as Caroline No trails out, they always play the recording of Banana and Louie barking at the train. And I don't know why, but that hits me hard. I don't know why. But I always cry when I hear that.
Mm.
And I'm not a crier. Don't look at me like that. I don't cry at things that normal people cry at.
Anywho. So I got nothing further to say about that show. I mean, other than it was fantastic. And coming up next, we saw, this was a kind of a surprise mini tour he did. And we saw him at the stop at B.B. King's nightclub in New York. He did a few nights there. We went on November 18th, 1999 or 2000.
Yeah, and because it's New York, and you always have to get ripped off in New York, it wouldn't be New York otherwise. What we normally would have paid for one ticket to see, B.B. King's cut in two.
Yeah,
so
they do that to all the shows.
They were actually still doing the Pet Sounds tour set list. So the Pet Sounds part was one ticket. That was like the second show. And the first show was the Beach Boys and some Brian solo stuff part.
We got there for the first set, which was, the Beach Boys stuff. And we're like, we can't leave.
Yeah.
We can't.
And we didn't.
And the thing is, like, they said, if you don't have tickets, you have to leave and come back and get more tickets.
Or like if you didn't, I don't think it was so much a ticket. I think you had to have a reservation and you had to pay for the ticket. Like they would just bring you, just like you get a bill in a restaurant. Because I remember signing for the second show and not even looking at how much it cost.
Yeah, I remember that too. But I remember they were trying to boot us out. Our new friends, Stan and Nancy.
Yeah, we had just met them that night.
They covered for us. And they basically made it so that we could stay and not have to leave and come back.
Yeah, because they had...
Or else we would have lost our seats. We had great seats.
They had reservations for both shows, and we only had the first one. Well, wasn't...
We paid for it, mind you.
Oh, yeah. Susan Lang introduced us.
She introduced us to them. She introduced us to Jeff Foskett.
Yeah, Jeff came out and talked and was very impressed that we had met because of Pet Sounds and because of Brian's music.
Here we are, a couple of 20-somethings like loving Pet Sounds. He was floored by that. It's really you're not familiar. You don't think this happens?
And the thing that really got me in the second show, we were sitting just a couple tables over from Carney Wilson. So Carney was front and center right in front of Brian, and we were a couple tables to her right. So we kept glancing over at her to see her reactions during the show.
That was awesome. She was screaming and jumping up and down.
And when Brian went for the high note and Caroline No and nailed it, looked over at Carney, she had her face in her hands. Yes. She was sobbing. And it's just like, anytime I see Carney... Like, there are times I think of her, and it's like the fact that she I mean, when she was a child, she saw Brian going through all kinds of things, and then she had years that she had no contact with him at all because of Landy.
Yeah.
So just like she said in the I Just Wasn't Made for These Times documentary, that it wasn't until she was in her 20s that she really got to have a real Father's Day with Brian. Yep. And it's just, for her, just to see Brian there, to see him married again and getting healthier and touring and recording and writing music. I think that was around the time she got married, because I think she got married like late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember
she had just had that surgery too, so she was skinny as a rail.
And I mean, I remember reading about how, Brian walked her down the aisle and did the first, all the things that a father does with his daughter at her wedding. Like, Carney got to have that, where there were probably many years that she didn't even dare dream of it. So whenever I see Carney, I always just just something gets me in my heart, just thinking what all of this must mean to her.
And I just remember when the show was over, like, she was talking to some people, she was still wiping tears away.
Yeah, I mean, it was a treat to see her.
Yeah.
Just to see her reactions to her dad performing.
Yep.
Also, after having done the whole Pet Sounds tour, Brian was gaining more confidence, and those B.B. King shows, I think maybe because it was a small venue, he seemed to be a lot more comfortable.
He did.
And more relaxed. So.
Oh, one other band shout out we have to do. Between those two shows, Paul came out and did a sax solo. Much to our friend Susan's delight.
Oh, yeah. But
sorry, Susan, we have to embarrass you.
And I mean, also you think about, here was Brian after a whole summer of having standing ovation after standing ovation for Pet Sounds. I think the whole reason that Brian started going down the road to begin with is Melinda knew that he needed to see the fans and hear the fans and get that love. And for him to get that for Pet Sounds, I mean, there have been tons of articles written. I know practically every British music magazine has declared Pet Sounds to be the greatest album ever, ever, ever. And Rolling Stone has it just behind Sgt. Pepper on many lists. But still, it's one thing to have it in a magazine or to get some kind of award or whatever, but it's another thing to have an audience full of regular people just singing along and cheering their asses off. That has to get through to him. So, yeah.
Indeed. That was the final show of 2000.
The next thing was the tribute to Brian Wilson, which, again, will be covered in its own podcast because there's that much to say about it. Oh, yeah. And we saw Brian again at the Arts Center later that summer in July. And another dinner at Fridays, more getting together with fan friends. A significant thing from that show was, well, you talk about it.
Yes. That was when Brian introduced Forever. And by the way, we're stepping into future episode territory here by talking about this, but the reason they did Forever, I had heard that Forever was rehearsed for the TNT tribute, but they didn't actually record it for the show because of timing reasons. There were a couple other songs, too, that they were going to do for the tribute, but they ended up not doing it all at the show, not even as a deleted cut or anything. But my guess is that since they had already rehearsed it, that they figured, let's toss it into the concert set. So I remember when Brian sang this at the Arts Center, he was channeling Dennis, because when he started to sing, that was not his voice that came out of his mouth. That was Dennis's voice. I swear I did not hear Brian. People might throw a recording at me and say, well, I was at that show here. Here's a recording. But that moment, I heard Dennis coming out of Brian's mouth. And he must have really been concentrating, too, because he had his eyes closed and both hands on the microphone as he sang it. So he was definitely just focusing in, channeling Dennis, saying, Dennis, come help me, buddy. Yeah. It was something.
I cried my ass off at that.
Yeah, while you're crying your ass off, there's some dipwad who keeps getting up, making you move your legs so he can get out.
All right.
And he kept coming
I don't
back.
even remember that.
Oh
so
my God. He was obviously
Okay.
there just for the Paul Simon set.
Okay.
And I remember also, particular that year, that a lot of people noticed Mike D'Amico was not on that tour, and he was replaced with Andy Paley. And I remember after the show, when the band was out mingling, I overheard somebody ask Darian, "Hey, where's Mike this year?" And Darian said, "Well, we owe our label a new album, so Mike's back in L.A. working on the album." He said, "Poor guy, he's really been stressing out over it."
Yeah, that was kind of cool that during the intermission, like, we never even went back and sat down for the Paul Simon
We wanted
set,
to. We intended to.
but, like, well, I mean, all of Brian's band were out on the little plaza.
Yeah,
and
we were chatting with...
We just spent the whole time talking to Probin and Melinda and a whole bunch
and
of
our
other
friends, too.
Yeah, it was just
And
awesome.
One thing I do have to mention that I remember that you might have forgotten about, while we were talking with people, our friend East Coast Dan swiped the program out of your bag and went over and had Brian autograph it. That was really cool.
Yeah. And just so you know, we're not going to be talking about every single show.
Yeah, we've been going on a long time.
Because we realized when we were planning this podcast that we were discussing things for like 4 hours. So it's like, yeah, we're going to like skip over some things. But a show that we do need to talk about is from the following summer at the House of Blues in Chicago. So this was kind of our first real out of town or out of the area.
Yep.
First time we went to a show where we weren't sleeping in our own bed that night.
Yes.
And we were already going to be out in Chicago to attend Beatle Fest.
Yes.
And as our practice was at that time, we would visit with Sean's family and spend some time in the city and also attend Beatle Fest. So we were kind of bouncing all over the area. We usually would come out for about at least a week, sometimes more than that.
Yeah.
So this time, the timing was very good that we got to go see the show at the House of Blues with our friend Dan Addington.
Yep.
And his, then, I don't even know if they were engaged yet.
I don't think they were yet.
So his future wife, Stephanie.
Or they might have been. I don't know.
And,
I don't know.
Who else? Jeff Malicki.
Rest in peace, Jeff.
And were the McCabe's there?
Yes, they were.
So we had dinner beforehand in the House of Blues restaurant where there was this obnoxiously loud band.
Yeah, we couldn't hear each other at dinner.
I know, we're all like yelling across the table because, man, I can't stand that. I cannot stand that when you're in a restaurant, whether it's live music or recorded. I mean, it's one thing if you are there to see or hear the band, but if you're just there to eat and you're with people and you can't hear them, that drives me nuts. But we went up to the show, and it was a show because they played stuff that we had not yet heard. Kind of like, again, going back to that Beacon show and thinking, oh, we're never going to hear Brian play this. Well, we were starting to hear Brian play some of these things that we never thought we'd hear.
Well, yeah, and we should mention that at the previous show at the Arts Center in 2001, we heard Our Prayer, Heroes and Villains, and Surf's Up, probably because they were done at the TNT tribute. So it's kind of like, hey, we might as well kind of promote this thing.
But we started to hear some more Smiles stuff. And
what did this show open with? You remember?
Well, it started with Brian Wilson, right?
Oh, no, that was in 2000.
Oh, okay.
That was in that tour when he started with the Bare Naked Ladies, Brian Wilson / Till I Die.
Yeah.
But in 2002, the shows started with the wonderful Cabanescence medley.
Ah, okay.
That was how it started.
Because I believe, wasn't this kind of a leading up to them going over to England?
I think they had just gotten back.
Oh, okay.
From it. But yeah, they did some shows at the Roxy that they said were rehearsal for the Queen's Jubilee.
That's right.
Which wasn't really true because the Queen's Jubilee, they did 3 songs?
Well, they may have done more that we just didn't see on the broadcast.
I don't think they did, say, all the Pet Sounds and Smile songs that they did in Hollywood.
But, I mean, it was a treat that for the British fans who are much more... I mean, there's such a strong following for Brian over in England that they got some stuff that we hadn't heard yet. So that was I mean, it was nice to know that they got like an extra special treat, but we got to hear that stuff eventually.
They were pleading for Brian to come over to England, and I remember Melinda saying, guys, it's really expensive to go to England, but I promise you we're working on it. We're trying to figure out how we can get there and everything. And they figured it out, thankfully.
Yeah. So yeah, we got to hear some really amazing stuff and attend a show with some other fan friends, and yeah, and it was like a standing room only kind of show. So it was, yeah. Do you have anything else?
I just remember how we got after party passes via a friend of ours who knows one of the band members, and they canceled the after party, but we still kind of hung out afterwards. We were talking to I remember what happened that night. Just on the off chance that I would get to meet them, I brought the liner from Wonderful World of Wonderments in case I could get them to autograph it. Thanks to that semi-after party that technically got canceled but still happened, I was able to do that. That was so awesome.
They were all there.
They were all there, Mike. In fact, I remember D'Amico was on stage and he was carrying an amp across the stage, and I was debating to myself, should I bother him now? He looks kind of busy. I figured, well, this might be my only chance. So I yelled over to him and I said, hey, Mike. And I got his attention. I said, can you sign this for me? And he said, sure. And he put the amp down and he walked over to the edge of the stage and sat down, and he smiled and said, this is the first time in 6 hours that I got to sit down. So he signs it, and Darian walks over, pats him on the back, and he said, this bastard has 3 songs on our new album. He's getting creative on us. And Probin signed it for me, and I saw Nick just sitting at the bar off by himself. So I walked over to him, and he was nice enough to sign it. And then I realized I don't know how to tell Mike and Probin apart on that little finger painting that Darian did on the cover. They look alike. So I said, hey, Nick, do you happen to know which one is which on here? He said, yeah, Probin's the one in stripes. Ah, okay. And he signed it. He said, where am I going to put my signature? I think the cloud will be a good place. So he put his little signature with the little square root of -1 thing equals surfs up, SERF apostrophe.
Oh, man.
So I was like, yes, I got all 4 of them. And I remember Darian, yeah. When I handed it to him, he said, yeah, I'll be happy to sign that. And he saw what it was. He said, oh my God, thank you for buying this. I think he thought it was going to be like the program or something.
Yeah.
And he said, do you know we have a new album coming out? And I said, mind if we make love to you? And he said, well, of course you'd know if you have this. But he was all excited to see that somebody bought one of his records. But
yeah.
I'll post a picture of that on the show notes.
And it's a great one, too.
Mostly covers.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to say, like, when we left the venue?
Oh, boy. Yeah. Yeah, we left the venue. We're talking with our new Chicago friends and Dan Addington, whom we knew for a few years by that time already. And we're just talking to him outside the venue, and Jeff Foskett walks by. And, he just says his pleasantries to us. And I remember one of our friend Jeff's friends was basically hounding him and said, Jeff,
he was hounding everybody. This guy was like, had a whole bunch of stuff, and he was bothering everybody in the world for their autographs and bothering Jeff.
And poor Foskett, he was exhausted. He was clearly exhausted.
I mean, like, not so much bothering Jeff for his own autograph, but bothering him to take stuff in to Brian to have Brian to sign.
And he's like, yeah, Brian's already in bed by now. And
yeah, so
I remember Jeff is just struggling to breathe because he is just exhausted. He's like, go to the Carl Walk. He'll sign it there. Go to the Carl Walk. Oh, Jeff, and I have this song that you recorded back, and it sounded just like Little Deuce. Go to the Carl Walk.
Yeah, that was his answer.
Yeah, the thing is, that show was later than what they were used to. I think it started at like 9. So they were all just ready to just collapse.
All right, so we're going to skip a bit because the next shows that we went to were the Smile shows.
The next 4 shows over 2 years.
So that is covered in our Smile episode, and I highly recommend that you listen to that because there's a lot of great stories there.
We have great stories after that, though.
Oh, boy.
Here's the thing.
I'm gonna get emotional.
You're getting verklempt? Yeah.
Seriously.
Now, here's the thing. We saw 2 shows back-to-back, one night after the other, at the Beacon Theater, November 21st and 22nd, 2006. We should talk about them as one block of shows, really.
Well, yeah, because the first show, we had really good seats. We were in the first row of the balcony, or the mezzanine, or whatever the first level up from the floor is called in that theater. Yeah. We had the front row right smack in the center of that balcony. That show was the first time that we saw Al Jardine with Brian's band.
Yes.
Al had joined up with Brian and has been with him ever since, pretty much. So Al, we got to hear Al singing lead on things like Help Me Rhonda and Sloop John B.
Then I Kissed Her.
And Then I Kissed Her. And I mean, Al sounded fantastic. I mean, just was a wonderful addition to the show. But the thing that this cracks me up to this day is that, okay, Al is kind of short.
Oh,
Brian
God.
is kind of tall. Brian is huge. And it was making me laugh that Al standing is the same height as Brian sitting. Because Brian was sitting at his keyboard. And it's like, Al is as tall as Brian sitting.
Yeah. Oh, I think Al did the guitar solo in Dance, Dance, Dance that night.
Probably.
He usually doesn't, but he did that night.
And we had just a fantastic time. I still have some video clips that I took with my little camera, because that was probably about the time that digital cameras were more and more in use, and venues were kind of loosening up on, like, they weren't confiscating memory sticks anymore, and they were kind of like, okay, fine, just take video, just don't be a jerk about it.
I think probably the most memorable thing about that night, other than besides getting together with our usual East Coast friends beforehand and being charged for spinach that I never received until everybody raised a stink to the manager, but anyway, I think the most memorable thing was before Brian did God Only Knows, he said, I think of all the songs that I've written, this is the one that I'm most proud of. And then they did God Only Knows. It was a Pet Sounds show, by the way. This was a part of a mini 40th anniversary Pet Sounds tour. Mm-hmm. And then what happened after Brian finished God Only Knows?
Well, the thing is, we had seen, because I think they had done another tour in England and Europe, and we had heard that the standing ovations after God Only Knows just went on and on. Yeah. And it was almost like, and I mean, I don't think this was ever anything like officially said. It was just kind of a thing among the fans. It's like, well, you know what? We're not going to let the Brits beat us at this. We're going to go berserk after God Only Knows too.
I honestly don't remember that, but I take your word for it.
So it became just a thing from then on to this day that after God Only Knows, you have to just stand up and cheer and clap and not let anything else happen for quite a while.
Yeah, because Brian even said, okay, everybody, that's enough. The audience just got louder. And it became apparent that we were not going to shut up, so Darian just started, I know there's an answer.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, as I mentioned before, we had dinner before the show with our usual East Coast friends, plus a couple of newcomers to the East Coast. Well, it was Leon from Pet Sounds Mailing List, who still to this day runs Pet Sounds Mailing List. He and his wife, Amy, had flown out from Ohio to see the show. Later on that night, our friend, who was also friendly with one of the band members, as we mentioned before, had been talking to that band member, and that band member told our friend, I'll leave you 5 tickets, bring some friends. So this person invited a few people, including Leon and Amy, except they had a flight out the next day, but they were going to try to change the flight. Well, the next day, you got a call from said friend who said, Leon and Amy couldn't change their flight. Would you guys like the tickets? All you got to do is cover your train fare. And of course, we're not going to say, yeah, we just saw him last night. No, hell no. It's like, yeah, we're coming. So yeah, we go there on November 22nd. And by the way, one thing we should mention, obviously we'd been to the Beacon before a couple of times, and I thought the sound was terrible there.
Oh, it was, until they renovated it.
They renovated it. It was still not the best, but it sounded much better. So I was really happy with that.
So the seats that we got, I mean, yeah, the tickets were free. The seats weren't all that great. They were like way in the back of the orchestra section, but hey, free is free.
But I remember when our friend went to Will Call to get the tickets, she got the tickets, and she's like, wait a minute. There were not only tickets, but all access passes.
Yeah, not just like after party, but all access. Yeah. And it's like,
and I remember you said, hey, after the show, let's just go backstage and thank the band member for being generous, and then we'll be on our way.
Yeah.
And once again, it was a great show. There wasn't an endless standing ovation for God Only Knows this time. But we go off to the side where somehow we found out where we had to go because there was an after party and all this. And so we had to be briefed on what was going on, except the guy who was giving the briefing noticed that we had these all access passes. And he pointed at us, he said, "Oh, you have all access passes. Just go ahead." And so we're like, okay. So we go backstage and yeah, there was a lot of people back there. The band was back there. Richie Havens was back there.
And Brian.
Well, that's the thing. He just kind of appeared out of nowhere and he walked over. There was a table with a pitcher of water and some glasses. He walked over to the table, poured himself a glass of water. And I remember you grabbed my hand. You said, "Come on." And you started walking in Brian's general direction. And I said, "Honey, what are you doing?" And she continued to walk in Brian's general direction to the point that it was no longer the general direction, but the specific direction. "Honey, what are you doing?" And suddenly we're standing right next to Brian. And I remember you said, "Hi, Brian." And immediately he put his drink down and smiled. And you said, "I'm Lisa, and this is my husband, Sean." And he extended his hand to you, and he said, "Hi, Lisa." And he shook your hand. And then he shook my hand.
And his hand was very soft.
And I'll tell you, when I shook his hand, I suddenly thought of that scene in Trading Places when Ophelia says to Winthorpe, "You have soft hands.
You've never worked a day in
You've
your
never
life."
worked an honest day." Or I don't remember
Yeah.
the exact quote. I could look it up now, but no.
And the thing is, okay, Brian, I believe, has hazel eyes, which, hazel eyes are kind of changeable. Like, they can look different colors in different light. And I swear to God, his eyes were blue.
They were very blue that night.
And all I ever needed to say to Brian was, "Thank you. Just thank you."
Well, yeah, me too. I said, "Brian, thanks so much for your music." I said, "We met because of Pet Sounds." And he said, "Whoa, great." And he still had this big smile on his face. And then he just walked away.
Yeah. And we went and talked to other members of the band.
Yeah.
We talked to Al for a little bit, and I complimented Al on mentioning Travels with Charlie in California. And he said, "Well, I never read that book." I think he wanted a Steinbeck title that fit into the lyrics. Yeah. And I'm like, "Al, I'm an English teacher. Don't tell me that."
God.
But we had a nice little conversation with Al. And
I remember you said, "You sounded great on I Know There's an Answer." And then Al said, "Isn't that a great song? I've always loved that song."
And
which I thought was unusual because we had all, the common lore was that the rest of the band didn't like Pet Sounds.
And we talked with Nelson, who told us the Bono story.
Yes, that was when we
learned story,
it.
A lot of people know this, but it's a very short story. It was, and I always forget the
Ivor
event.
Novello Awards 2003.
So Bono comes up to Brian and was all fangirly and gushy and everything. And Bono happened to be dressed very similar to the waitstaff at this event.
Yeah, the waitstaff were all in black, which Bono is always wearing black.
And so Brian says, "Oh, thank you very much. Could you get me a Diet Coke?" And Bono gets him the Diet Coke. And of course, what I always have to wonder, since Brian has always been known for putting people on, did he truly not recognize Bono? Maybe the light was low or something. Did he truly think that Bono was just an enthusiastic waiter? Or did he know exactly who he was talking to and was like, "Yeah, I'm going to tell this guy to get me a Diet Coke because he's going to get me one anyway"?
We have talked about this numerous times, and I keep telling you, Brian himself recounted this story in the book I Am Brian Wilson, and he said that he did not realize that it was Bono.
Honey?
What?
We know that Brian has always put people on. Again, just because Brian said that in his book, I still hold that he could have been putting Bono on. Because, as Nelson said, only Brian Wilson can get away with this shit.
Those were his exact words. He rolled his eyes and said that before he told that story.
And when I complimented Darian on Barbarella.
Yes.
On Wonderful World of Wonderments. And I said, "It sounds so Pan Am." And his eyes lit up And he's like, that's exactly what I was going for. So I was very happy to make Darian happy.
Yeah, he told us that the band would play at that restaurant that used to be at LAX, that little wacky.
Yeah,
you see it in all the pictures of LAX. He said they called themselves the After Dinner Mints, and he said that he would sing Barbarella while planes were taking off and landing behind him.
So after we left, I don't remember how long we stayed. We may have just either made our way out or kind of left when other people were starting to leave. But we get out to the street to head back to Penn Station to go, because we were staying at my mother's house because it was Thanksgiving week. We get out to the street and it just hit me that I had talked with Brian Wilson and shook his hand and looked at his blue eyes. And I just completely lost my shit right there on Broadway.
Yep.
I think I fell to my knees and just started to cry. And I was like, and yeah, I needed to do that before getting on the train.
The other thing I remember about those, 12 seconds we had with Brian, tall. That guy, he's a tall mofo. I'm 6'2".
You had to look up.
I had to arch my neck up significantly. And the thing is, he's supposedly only, 6'4", maybe 6'3"?
Yeah, he's huge.
How does that work? I can show you the medical records that say that I'm 6'2".
He is huge. He's a big man.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yes.
So the next is the Hammerstein Ballroom show in 2008 that was a benefit for Stand Up to Cancer. And I'm going to let you talk a bit about this.
Yeah, because you don't really remember a lot from it.
I really don't. I don't know why. I mean, Yeah,
well, the thing is, this was a one-off show, and because it was a one-off and most of the band had other things going on, it was a very small band. The band consisted of Scott Bennett on drums, Probin on bass, Nick and Jeff on guitars, Gary Griffin on keyboards, and the show was billed as Brian Wilson and Friends. I remember it was a particularly expensive show because it was a charity show. One of the friends, as the bill said, was Lily Holbrook, and she did a set. And I remember when the PA announcer introduced Lily Holbrook, the entire section we were in unison, said, "Who?" I mean, seriously, I looked her up before we did this. I could not find a stick of information about her. But she had some obvious fans in the crowd, like 6 or 7. I also remember Al Cooper from the original lineup of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And is he in the band or something? I don't remember. He played on a lot of Bob Dylan. Like, most people listening probably know who Al Cooper is. He joined the band for a couple of songs. He sang the second verse of Caroline No. And at one point, Brian introduced Jonah Osborne, and she came out and sang the second verse of God Only Knows when they did that song. What I found particularly weird was that during that entire show, there was no mention whatsoever of the charity. There was no mention that it was a charity show that was Stand Up to Cancer or anything like that. Even weirder, Brian did not have a teleprompter. He was going entirely by memory. And it kind of showed because this was before That Lucky Old Sun was released. And they did Southern California. And Brian forgot some of the words. But thankfully, Scott was there to jump in and kind of rescue him during that part. But overall, I thought it was a really good, strong show, despite there being kind of a skeletal band. I thought they did a great job. And I remember there were a lot of people complaining about that show and the price and everything. I don't remember if it was Melinda or somebody from the Lippin group saying, all right, if you're really unhappy with it, we'll give you your money back. And I was kind of ticked off about that because, dude, it was a charity show. Shut up. The money went to a good cause. And I don't know, I was kind of ashamed to see all that stuff.
Yeah, that was
not cool, people.
Yeah. So after that, later in 2008, we got to see That Lucky Old Sun show at the Chicago Theater. I think that was our first time attending a show at the Chicago Theater.
I think so. We'd never been there for any other reason before.
Which is a gorgeous, just breathtakingly gorgeous venue.
Yes.
And we had already heard That Lucky Old Sun. We already had the album, right?
Yeah, the album was out. And the demos might have already been circulating, but I can't say authoritatively for sure that they were.
So we already knew the songs. We already knew what they were going to play because they had premiered it in England and the CD had come out. We knew that there was that little piece of Can't Wait Too Long, which was the first time we had heard it actually not as a sessions piece. It was actual, like, here it is as a part of something. But what got me was on the video screen, they had, just in this short little piece, they had a montage of pictures of the Wilson brothers from when they were children up to the Grammys in 1977 when the three of them presented Best New Artist, and just all these different pictures of them with the band singing, Been Too Long. I mean, oh my God. And then it goes into Midnight's Another Day, which we had heard, of course, but...
Remember when we first heard that song?
Well, we heard the demo, and it was like,
this is just the demo?
This is just the demo. And hearing it done live with all the other vocals just building and building and building in it. You hear Brian singing, all these people, they made me feel so alone. And it just made you want to beat the crap out of anybody who was ever not nice to Brian in his whole life. And it's like kind of stealing a line from Hair. How dare they try to end this beauty? I mean, it just, man, that was ugly cry. And anytime, we've heard it a couple other times that it was ugly cry every time. Yeah. Just, again, thinking of that. What I love is how you have Midnight's Another Day, this heavy emotional piece, just like how you have Fire in Smile, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, and how it kind of goes into something that's very calming. Just like how Midnight's Another Day goes into like a little calming piece before going into going home. Oh, that was quite an experience.
It was. Did we hear that in Milwaukee in the next show we went to? I honestly don't remember much about that Pabst show.
Neither do
than
I.
That Pabst theater show, other than that we were there.
The only thing that was significant is that was the first time we were in Milwaukee, and I had a really great risotto at dinner before the show. That's all I really remember.
I remember enjoying the show.
Yeah.
I remember seeing our friend Jeff, and I think maybe the McCabe's.
The McCabe's were there,
I think so. But that was October 24th, 2009. And sorry, we're just kind of glossing over that. We just don't remember a lot. It was...
Well, I mean, not every show is going to be, like, hugely memorable, and...
For me, the next one we saw very much was.
The next one was really memorable because for this show, we went to Canada.
Yep, Massey Hall in Toronto, or as they say in Toronto, Toronto.
Yeah.
Tronno.
So this was our first time going to any place in Canada, and we took this little airline from Chicago called Porter, which I highly recommend.
They were fantastic.
It's not even jets, it's like little propeller planes, but they're very nicely equipped, and the flight attendants wear really chic little uniforms, and everything's in English and French. And
yeah, they're little planes, but I'm a big guy, and I was very comfortable.
And the beer and wine are free beverages on these flights. And you go into the Billy Bishop Airport, which is right on the Toronto waterfront. It's this little airport that's on this little airstrip, and you have to take a ferry to get to the city. The ferry, it's this big thing that you get, you step onto it, and it only goes like 600 feet or something. It's this, like, you basically...
It goes like, and you're there.
Yeah, it's like, and it's like, you're there, and
Can't you
get
just
off.
lower a drawbridge or something?
I know. It was very funny.
I have a story I want to tell about my experience using Facebook at that airport, but I'm not going to take up the podcast time doing that.
So we got a cab to our hotel, and it was just kind of a funny experience for us because Toronto is there's so much that is familiar, yet things that are different. Like I turned on the TV in the hotel room and there was a Walmart commercial in French. Like, it was just, I went to McDonald's just because I wanted a sweet tea and they don't know what that is in Canada.
We could not find brewed tea anywhere.
They gave me a can of Nestea. It was like, I mean, it was just fun to...
I'll tell you, I loved Toronto.
Oh, it was lovely.
Loved it.
It was lovely. And I mean, we had a great
and
time.
People
just
were great there.
Walking around. And again, just you're in a different place. Just like when you travel anywhere else, you just kind of take in the differences and appreciate them. But it was just kind of amusing. Like you're in a different country and a lot of it is familiar, but then there are things that aren't familiar. But we went to this show, which was just in a outstanding venue, beautiful venue, and the crowd was hugely Brianista.
Yeah. And I imagine that the crowd was almost like England proportions in terms of very expressing their love, seriously. And Brian was feeding off it big time.
And this was around the time that the Gershwin album came out. Yeah. So they did a lot of Gershwin. They did
the entire Gershwin.
Yeah. I mean, a standout was Brian singing Summertime. He did beautifully on that.
He held out that note, Summertime, and the crowd went wild. And seriously, Brian was so on that. And I have never been to a better Brian concert. Even the Smile concerts weren't that good.
It was outstanding.
It was fantastic.
And after the show, right across the street was a location. There are several locations of this in the Toronto area. Fran's, which is kind of
Fran's.
I think it's a longtime diner, but they had renovated more recently to have like a very retro 50s. So it was like very 50s looking, but new, like nice and sparkly, but with the little like crazy shapes and the seats upholstered in the vinyl that has glitter underneath it. And
I remember mostly poutine and Bailey's milkshakes.
Yes, they had boozy milkshakes that were so amazing. Yeah, the Kahlua one was my favorite.
But I remember before the show, I saw Nelson walk out of there.
Well, we figured this was a place that we would find various Brian band members at. You know, it's like the whole place is like, that must be what Darian's living room looks like.
Yeah. There are a few particular moments about the show I remember besides the Summertime note that Brian held out. I remember when he sang the first line of I Loves You, Porgy, the crowd went crazy.
Oh, yeah.
The thing about the Gershwin album, that is what I love about current period Brian. Like he has a great mid-range voice for that kind of stuff, kind of croony stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember Jeff Foskett announcing that Andy Kim was in the audience.
Boy.
He had the #1 hit when I was born. So, yeah.
Yay.
Yeah, now our audience is calculating my age. But anyway, I also remember during intermission, I had to, as politely as possible, correct a guy I was talking to out in the lobby who said that Diamond Head sounded fantastic that night.
Was it Pet Sounds?
It was Pet Sounds, yeah. It's like, Diamond Head? He's like, yeah, that instrumental they did. I was like, no, it wasn't Diamond Head.
Oh, and a cool thing about that show was it was the day after my last day of school. So basically, like you picked me up, we went to the airport, and that was a great end of school year.
That was a great trip, too.
And just a few weeks later was... I don't really think we need to talk much about this show except just simply the placement of it, in that we saw Brian on July 30th at the Arcada Theater in St. Charles, Illinois. The next day, we saw Paul McCartney at Wrigley Field, which is 2.5 miles from our home. And it's just the back-to-back 1-2 punch of Brian and Paul was just... It took a while to recover from that.
Yeah. Still, a couple of things I do want to mention. Like, that was our first time at the Arcada. That place is... It's a lovely theater for when it was built. But it's in severe need of upgrades, really. It was an abbreviated show because they did not have strings and horns like they did in Canada. They weren't going to have it for every show. I could see why, because there literally was not enough room.
Oh, yeah. The Arcada Theater stage is very small.
It's a tiny stage, yeah. So they only did half the Gershwin stuff. This time, instead of Andy Kim being in the audience, Bunny E. Carlos was in the audience. So during intermission on my way to the men's room, I almost stepped on Dylan Wilson accidentally. That kid looks scarily like Melinda.
Yeah.
I refuse to believe he was adopted. I think he's their natural kid.
Wow.
He looks that much like Melinda. But, oh yeah, another thing, I just have to mention this. I remember the previous show at Massey Hall. We had kind of crept our way up to the front of the stage during the encore number, and Jeff Foskett spotted us.
Yeah.
And he waved to us, and during a guitar solo, he walked over to us and shook our hands. Hey, good to see you guys.
Well, I mean, really, the whole front of the stage was just lined with people like leaning on the stage and for the encore set. By that point, I mean, they weren't making people stay back. That was really nice. I don't think I ever went to a show where they allowed people to just come down and put their elbows on the edge of the stage and just take in the encore set.
Yeah.
The following summer, now I count this as a Brian show because so much of Brian's people were involved.
Yes.
On July 1st, we went to Milwaukee Summerfest to see the Beach Boys' 50th anniversary tour. So it was most of Brian's band, some of the Beach Boys band, Mike, Bruce, Al, David Mark.
Whom we actually saw in the audience at the Beacon in 2006.
And it was just, I hate to admit this, but at the end of the show, I'm like, there was nothing embarrassing about that. Like,
That was a great show.
They looked good. They sounded good.
They all sounded fantastic.
They all had they were dressed well for it. They all were wearing like really cool shirts and like those kind of men's button-down shirts that are meant to be untucked. And they all looked fantastic. I mean, it was just great. And the backing band blended well together, and they did beautiful tributes to Carl and Dennis. And I cried during the car. See, I knew
thought you were going to cry during the Dennis tribute.
because I knew what they were doing. Like, they put up on the video screen performances of, respectively, like Dennis singing Forever and Carl singing God Only Knows, and had their vocal, but with the band playing. So they weren't playing the rest of the audio. It was like that man singing and then everybody else live on stage playing along with them. So I knew what they were doing, and I thought the Dennis one would really get to me. I mean, it did, but I didn't cry at it. But when they started God Only Knows and they had Carl up on the screen, oh man, I lost it.
Yeah.
That hit me much harder than I thought it would.
I thought Dennis was going to do you in there, but things I remember particular about that show, first of all, surprise highlight for me, Be True to Your School. I loved that part so much.
Well, because Mike had to start it out like almost making fun of himself.
He'd been doing that for years at that time.
But we didn't know that. Because Mike started going, wee.
Not even that part, just the performance overall. I was like, why am I loving this so much?
And then, of course, during the little middle part, now...
Oh, yeah.
In the song, the recorded version of the song...
The single version.
Yeah, they have in the middle, like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which is the Hawthorne High School fight song, which, like many high schools back through the years, many high schools based their fight songs on popular college fight songs, like Notre Dame or whatever. So, On Wisconsin was a very well-known high school fight song. But we happen to be in Wisconsin. Yep. So when they played da-da-da-da-da, everybody went berserk because it's like, oh, they're playing On Wisconsin. And they had on the screen, I thought it was kind of cool that, well, during the beginning part of the song, of course, Brian lettered in like 8 different sports. So they had pictures from his high school yearbook of him running track and playing baseball. And they had a picture of Mike Love who playing basketball when he was in high school, and Al Jardine was on the football team with Brian, and then they kind of were like, oh yeah, and there's Carl and Dennis, and because I don't think Dennis probably was eligible to ever play sports in high school.
I don't think anybody at Hawthorne. Dennis, who's Dennis Wilson?
And
again?
Carl just was not an athlete, but they. Be True to Your School was based on Brian's own experience. I mean, he lettered in several sports. And then...
and I did not go to any of the colleges whose logos were flashed on the screens, but I was like, this is awesome!
Well, yeah, because I think they had, of course, University of Wisconsin, and they had Marquette, which is near Milwaukee. And I know from when they did the show at the Garden State Arts Center in Holmdel, New Jersey, because I think I checked a video of this that was on YouTube, they had Rutgers.
Of course they did.
So, yeah.
Somehow I don't think when they did the Chicago shows, which we didn't go to for whatever reason, I don't think they had St. Francis on their thing.
I can tell you why. The Chicago shows were on weeknights.
That's right, yeah.
They were still during the school year.
Yeah,
so
that's
we
true,
chose to go to Summerfest because we hadn't been there yet. And
Summerfest is great, by the way.
Yeah, because I think they did 2 nights
there
at the Chicago Theater in like the end of May. So we chose to not go to those. But
a couple other things I remember. After intermission, they did Pet Sounds, the instrumental track. I'm not saying like the whole album, just that one track with David Marks playing the lead guitar on it. Also during that show, they did I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. Brian singing it. He got a standing ovation for that.
Cute, with lots of like, I always love hearing male voices say, "We love you, Brian!" Like, I love when men get fangirly.
I don't remember what show it was, but I heard someone in the crowd say, "We love you, Brian." Brian said, "We love you too, whoever you are."
And then a neat little side thing at the end of the show, Mike Love mentioned that Chicago was doing a show that had just started, and it was at one of the free, well, I shouldn't say free, it's like at Summerfest there's a number of different stages and venues, so Chicago was doing a show, like you didn't need a separate ticket to get into that show, it was just another stage, and Mike said, go see our friends, go see Chicago. So we did.
He said, yeah, we're going to do that after we're done here.
Yeah, a lot of their people
the other
went
thing
over.
that I have to mention, we're kind of going a little bit away from just Brian and the whole Beach Boys, but that's okay. That's Why God Made the Radio at the time, I think had just peaked at number 3. And Mike had said that they were trying to see if they could get it to go to number 1. So they were offering it for sale, packages of 10 copies of That's Why God Made the Radio. And he was saying, come on, buy these packages, give them to friends, give them to family. Because right now, Adele is number 1, and we want the number 1 spot. Because, man, Adele sold a shitload of records. And he said, we love Adele, but we want the number 1 spot.
Well, also, if I recall, that was around the time that other artists were doing things like that.
Yeah.
Like I remember Prince had done something where if you bought a ticket to his show, you got a copy of his CD, and through some loophole, those counted as sales. Like, for some reason, that would count with SoundScan or whatever the tracking is now, or at that time. So, yeah, he was selling. If you bought a concert ticket, you got a copy of his CD, and that racked up sales for him.
Nice.
Because that would be thousands of CDs each night of whatever tour he was doing.
Well played, Mr. Nelson, wherever you are.
So the next year, we went to another venue for the first time, Ravinia in Highland Park, Illinois. And I don't remember anything from this show.
The only things I remember are just personal things. Like, we are frequent students at the Old Town School of Folk Music here in Chicago. I love that place so much. They have ensemble classes, and we were taking, I think, might have been Monkeys Ensemble at the time that our friend Kathy was teaching. She went to that show at Ravinia. And after the show, she texted one of us and said, we need to get together right now because I want to do Beach Boys Ensemble. We need to talk about this show we just saw. And so we got together and had a late night snack with her at a diner.
Yeah.
And that's what I remember about that most of all. But basically, if you live in the Chicago area, going to Ravinia is a rite of passage.
Yeah, it's a beautiful venue that's, it's an amphitheater with a massive lawn around it that's kind of set amongst the trees. And you can take the train there from Chicago, and the train stops right at the front gate. So you don't have to worry about parking, and you can bring in whatever food and drink you want. You don't have to buy their stuff, though you can.
Yeah, they have decent food.
They have several sit-down restaurants and also a food court, and you can bring in alcohol. In fact, they even sell in their little shop, they have bottle openers and all kinds of wine accessories that you can bring. And if you don't have seats in the pavilion, you bring your chairs, your picnic blanket. People bring little tables and all kinds of things and set up a little camp and just enjoy the music. It's a great place. We haven't been there every summer, but we try to get there at least once a summer because it's a very enjoyable place. Very beautiful.
One thing I do remember, David Marks was on that tour that year, and we have a friend who, I don't know the story, but she became friends with David and Carrie Marks, and they said, hey, when we're in town, have dinner with us, and they were having dinner at one of the restaurants at Ravinia. I remember we saw our friend, and we just kind of stopped at her table for a moment and just kind of heckled her. I didn't realize she was eating with David Marks and Carrie Marks.
I know.
And I felt stupid later on.
Yeah. Yeah, because David Marks doesn't look like David Marks. I mean, like, you don't really expect...
Yeah, he was like, what, 8 years old when he was with the Beach
I know,
Boys? I
but
mean,
it's
he
just
looks
like
different now.
I know,
so-
but it's just like, I mean, even if you know what he looks like, you don't expect him.
He's freaking tall, for one thing. That was really what I remember from that show. I think Al was on the tour, too. So it was both. It was like 3 Beach Boys and a Brian Wilson solo show.
And then in October, we went out to Washington, D.C.
Ooh, 2 days after my birthday.
Kind of an odd pairing. Brian did a tour with Jeff Beck, who I really know absolutely nothing about.
I know a little bit more about Jeff Beck. I know he's British. And I know that his band was the backup band on Donovan's Barabajagal album.
So it was like a show where Brian did some stuff, Jeff did some stuff, Jeff did some of Brian's stuff, and then they did stuff together. We were at the Warner Theater. An interesting thing about that is the seats that we had had almost no leg room for my 6'2" husband.
Yeah, that theater was made for like Davy Jones.
Yeah. So where Sean was, even though I think we were even on an aisle, but Sean just could not get comfortable.
Yeah, the only way I could sit was if I stretched my legs out across 4 other seats.
So we went and talked to an usher and said, is there anything we can do? Yeah, anything we can do so that my husband can be a little more comfortable. The usher went off to talk to a manager, and we basically ended up with a box seat that was practically right above the stage.
And that was when I made this shocking discovery about what Brian was playing. Now, since the Beach Boys tour in 2012, Brian had been using this white grand piano-looking thing on stage. It's fake. It's actually an electronic keyboard stuffed into a white piano shell looking thing. Because we could see the LED or the LCD screen from the keyboard from where we were sitting.
But I mean, the Jeff Beck portion, even though it was kind of like, huh? I mean, it was still pretty amazing, especially that violinist he had with him.
She was great. But yeah, if you like Jeff Beck, man, you would have loved this show.
Your brother.
My brother loves Jeff Beck. I remember when the album Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop came out sometime in the 80s, my brother would not shut up about it for like 6 weeks before it was even released.
Yeah, and he happened to be on a business trip in a city where another date on that tour was happening, and he decided to just buy a ticket.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, he was there for Jeff Beck, not really for Brian, but he told us he was very impressed with Brian and his band. So that was...
Yeah, I got to be honest, like the Jeff Beck set got old for me really fast because it just sounded like the same thing over and over for half an hour. But, that's, nothing against Jeff Beck, but,
So moving on. In 2015, we went back to Ravinia for another Brian show. And then in November of that year, we saw Brian at the Four Winds Casino in New Buffalo, Michigan. We go to New Buffalo quite often and even sometimes eat at some of the restaurants at Four Winds because they have some really good stuff there. But I would not recommend their concert venue because it's basically just a giant room that they set chairs up.
It's probably, I imagine most casinos are that.
I mean, it's not the greatest venue, but the thing about that show was that was the same day as the mass shooting in Paris.
Yeah.
And Brian changed some of the words of Love and Mercy to reflect that. I don't remember exactly.
A lot of people out there getting shot. It's just not fair.
Yeah. That was really something that he took a moment to mention that.
We had front row seats in that show, didn't we?
I believe
we did.
But the way the seats were set up, we were
still quite a distance back.
We were quite a distance, and it was also the stage was kind of high.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the same as just being in a regular theater where front row you feel much closer to the action.
Yeah. And by the way, we didn't get front row seats to be, front row seats. We got it for practical reasons so that you could actually see without tall people getting in your way.
Yeah.
I remember in particular, they were about to do Marcella, and Brian said, okay, I want to call my friend Scott Bennett down to the front of the stage. And so Scott comes down with his guitar, and Brian said, Scott's going to sing a song for you called Marcella. And Scott said, what? He's like freaking out. He's like, no, Brian, I'm not singing this. You're singing this. I'm just doing the guitar solo. And I remember when they started Marcella, Brian was so fixated on the idea that somebody else was going to sing it that he didn't sing it. He didn't start singing it. They went like 2 lines before I think somebody poked him in the back or something and was like, sing, sing, sing.
So next we're at 2016. When they launched a massive tour in honor of the 50th anniversary of Pet Sounds. Now, keep in mind, back in 2006, for the 40th anniversary of Pet Sounds, they said this was the last time they were going to be doing Pet Sounds.
Yeah, Brian himself said he was retiring Pet Sounds because he needed to do other stuff.
Yeah, well, they didn't retire anything because in 2016, they were doing a huge tour for Pet Sounds. When that schedule came out, and we saw that the Hollywood Bowl was on July 10th. We're like, we got to do this.
Yeah.
We needed to see Brian in his natural habitat in Southern California. And what better place to go than the Hollywood Bowl?
I remember I forewarned you that I said, on the off chance they decide to do Southern California, you're going to watch your husband turn into a big sobbing mess.
They didn't, but that would have been something. But that was your first time staying in Los Angeles.
In LA, yeah.
And I wasn't sure.
It.
Yeah, see, I didn't think you were going to like it,
I didn't think so either,
it.
But I loved it. I can't wait to go back.
And we stayed just down the street from the Hollywood Bowl. There's a Hilton Garden Inn that I highly recommend. It was a very nice hotel with a really, really cool pool out back, and we could walk to the Hollywood Bowl. We could walk right up the street. I didn't think it was possible to walk anywhere in Los Angeles, but we could do that. And we found the Hollywood Bowl. Yes, I know the food there wasn't good. You don't have to go on about that. But I'm just nipping that in the bud right now.
Hated the food.
But the Hollywood Bowl has a lot of the same vibe as Ravinia in that they encourage picnicking. You can bring in your own stuff. You can bring in your own alcohol. And the only difference is that there's no lawn. It's all, I think it's like regular seats down in front. And most of the venue is just like marked bleacher seats. And so you can even just bring your food right to your seat. And it's all open air and just absolutely stunningly gorgeous.
Yeah.
And the opening act was the hymn of She and Him.
Emma Ward.
Yeah, but Zooey Deschanel did join him on stage, which was very nice.
And you know my issue with this.
I know that Zooey Deschanel should have joined Brian in on that song that they did together from blah, blah, blah.
My issue is that they had She and Him. They didn't do any she and him songs.
They just did it.
Zooey Deschanel's purpose of being there was to shake a tambourine and jump repeatedly. That's pretty much all she did. And I hated that M word. Kept talking like this.
Well, he's the type of person who talks like that.
Does he talk like this to his mother?
Probably.
I did notice that the first song he did, he ended it with the riff from You Still Believe in Me.
But the show was just outstanding. I mean, there's got to be something said for Brian doing a concert where he can go back to his own bed that night.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, what's kind of nice
I hope he got to, because I know he had to do a show in Arizona, either the night before or the night after.
What's kind of nice is in the book, I Am Brian Wilson, it ends with him talking about the drive over to that show and just thinking about, it's almost like a little in my life kind of thing, just thinking about different places and things from his life experience. It's like he was going there to sing to us.
And the things that he was mentioning that they drove past on the way there. So I was like, I remember seeing that place. Yes.
And he was on Mulholland Drive. I know where that is. And what was very sweet too is for the encore, the traditional Beach Boys hoedown set, Carney and Wendy brought out the grandchildren, and they were all
Wendy was there too?
I think she was.
Oh, okay.
So I
definitely remember Carney.
The grandchildren were all on stage with dancing around during fun and all that. So that was very, very special.
And we were very fortunate because Darian was not on that tour because I think he was involved in a Disney project at the time, but he did take the stage for the Pet Sounds set.
Because if he was,
I love those two
if he
together.
was working in LA, he was there, so it wouldn't have been any big deal for him to show up at that show. But it was wonderful to see Brian Wilson in Southern California.
And really, so far, the Hollywood Bowl is my favorite venue I've ever been to, and one of the best musical experiences I ever had. In fact, I told this to Probin when I saw him in the buffet line at the Four Winds when we saw him backing up Mike Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz. One of the best musical moments of my life was hearing them perform Let's Go Away for a While at the Hollywood Bowl as the sun was setting.
Yeah,
the sun doesn't set over the bowl itself, but it's
the light,
still
like the light.
Yeah,
just the
it was
light.
Amazing.
And it was with the mountains in the background, and it was amazing. So we saw 2 more shows that year. We went to Nashville to see at the Ryman Auditorium, which is, of course, the original home of the Grand Ole Opry. And I did not know that venue is very much like the Ocean Grove Auditorium, where I'm from in New Jersey. Very special place to me.
The Mike and Bruce version of the Beach Boys often play, by the way.
Yeah, very special place to me, where it's an old wooden structure with colored panes of glass. Just a place where you really just have a great feel of history, and also a building with a lot of wood, which is wonderful for acoustics.
Yes.
And a notable event from that show was meeting up with Rob McCabe, and I don't think we talked to Denise, but we did get to meet their beagle, Banana.
Yeah, I remember just before the show, I was just kind of walking somewhere, and I saw this beagle. I was like, oh, there's a beagle here. And I see, oh, it's right. Oh, this must be Banana. And I remember Rob's exact words when he saw me. Holy shit. I said, yeah, nice to see you too, Rob.
And because, I mean, and Banana is a very special medical support dog. That
she was a good girl.
That's why the dog was at the venue. It was very good to meet that little beagle.
Yep.
Because, I mean, we love beagles.
Yep. As Brian usually would do after doing all of Pet Sounds, we follow it up with Good Vibrations. So after they finished Pet Sounds, Brian said something along the lines of, did you come here for some really bad vibrations? No, you came here for good vibrations. I just love that. That was so Brian.
It is.
That was my first time in Nashville. I did not like Nashville, but I loved the Ryman.
Well, the problem is we didn't really spend very much time there.
And we were only by Broadway.
We were kind of in the tourist trappy part.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
I'm sure there's lovely parts in Nashville.
There's great stuff in Nashville, and I really would like to go back and see more of it and spend some more time there.
Yeah, Lewis, Wyatt, if you guys are listening, you got to take us on a nice tour.
Then we also saw the show back at the Chicago Theater on October 1st.
Sorry to interrupt, but just as kind of an overall thing, that year was when Brian was starting to cut. He was obviously getting tired of Pet Sounds because he was kind of like singing a lot of Pet Sounds. But having said that, I think the Ryman was the best of the 3 Pet Sounds shows we went to. Chicago was pretty good, but the Ryman Theater, I think he was the most on that night.
Well, in 2017, we were at the Rosemont Theater on October 6th, which, again, we heard Pet Sounds.
Did we?
Yes. They were selling Pet Sounds merchandise at that show.
They were still doing
I have that little coin purse, and yeah.
I do remember this, though. Like, during intermission, some guy sitting in front of us was complaining about how... Oh, what was he? He was talking to us. He said...
They weren't doing enough Beach Boys.
They weren't doing enough Beach Boys. So it's like, dude, there was nothing but Beach Boys. There wasn't a single non-Beach Boys song.
There may have been things he didn't know, such as the Wild Honey mini set that they did, which was... Brian was kind of bored with Pet Sounds, but man, he sure enjoyed doing several songs from Wild Honey, including I'd Love Just Once to See You.
Yeah. I'm sure we heard him do that before,
which,
though.
As we all know, ends with the line, I'd love just once to see you in the nude.
Yep. Yeah, they did Let the Wind Blow, which sounded really... Although I really wish they did the in-concert arrangement, but hey, it's for the Wild Honey album.
I wish they had done the whole album, because the whole album is only, 20 minutes?
You really want them to do the whole album?
No, except for How She Boogalooed It.
Yeah, I was going to say.
They can flush that down the nearest toilet. Yeah, I always say How She Boogalooed It is a song that kind of lost its way on the way to a Romp in a Monkees episode, and that is not to put down the Monkees whatsoever, because
we both love the Monkees.
But How She Boogalooed It would have been a great song for a Monkees episode.
Yes.
But yeah, it doesn't work for the Beach Boys. Now, the next show, November 30th, 2018. This was a show kind of early in their Christmas tour. They did a tour of all Beach Boys Christmas songs and Brian's solo Christmas songs. And the thing about that show, not so much the show itself, which was great, but it was the day after our beagle Ruthie died. Because the night before, we had come home, in fact, from Beach Boys ensemble class at the Old Town School, and I went to get ready for bed, and Sean took Ruthie out for a bedtime pee. And when he brought her back in, she yelped and collapsed and was gone. So she must have just had a heart attack that took her very quickly. And we bundled her up in a blanket and took her over to the 24-hour emergency vet. They confirmed that she was gone, and could not have been nicer to take us through, the final arrangements and give us some time with her. We were stunned. We were shocked. I mean, she was 14, but still, it was so sudden. And
she had no health problems.
Well, she had an issue that was not life-threatening.
Yeah, it was treatable.
Yeah, that she had been on medication for years, but there was nothing that we had gotten an indicator of that it was detrimental to her health or that it would cause an early death or something. But I think it was just her time. So...
and as we're talking about this, our current beagle Lola walked in, and I think she's trying to hint to us that she wants to do something.
So that show, I called out of work because we didn't get home until 2 a.m. from the vet. You had already planned to take a day off.
I was already off, yeah.
So we went to the show because we had the tickets and everything, but we truly needed it.
Yeah.
And I just remember feeling... during especially the encore set, just feeling like a little bit healed by that music.
I felt fantastic after that show.
I was still hurting, but it helped. It really helped. It helped to have that show to go to and to just be with that music that we loved so much.
Yeah.
And to just comfort us in that way.
But as for the show itself, it was the entire Beach Boys Christmas album and some select tunes from Brian's Christmas album and a lot of other Beach Boys stuff too. The least significant thing about that show was Brian himself, because he really didn't sing that much. Most of the band took leads on most of the songs. Brian had recently had back surgery, and he was obviously still in a lot of pain because somebody had to help him on stage. I don't know if it was one of the band or a stagehand or what. He was clearly in a lot of pain.
He was really struggling. And wasn't it the following spring that he postponed some dates and said,
I don't remember. He might have.
And said that was not just physically struggling, but he was mentally struggling.
Right. Yeah, that's right. You're right. But I remember just watching him just struggle to walk on stage, and I thought, man, why just put him in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
You know? But the show, I loved that show. One thing I remember in particular, other than the fact that there was a kind of folksy opening act, they didn't have any kind of orchestra or anything. But for We Three Kings, they did kind of an Irish, almost a lutish arrangement that worked extremely well. They still had the exact same lush harmonies and everything. It was the same arrangement, but without the strings, but with a little bit more kind of a Irish folky feel to it. And I thought it worked excellent with pardon my lack of an adverb there. I'm a grammar person, of course. But anyway.
Now, show number 30 for us was on September 22nd, 2019, which was at the end of a wonderful weekend for us because we had already planned to go to San Diego for our 20th wedding anniversary.
Yes.
And we had planned a trip from Wednesday to Saturday. And then we find out that at that time, Brian was touring with the Zombies. And they were doing Odyssey and Oracle. Again, another full album performance on a tour. And they were going to be in Milwaukee on that Sunday. So it's like, well, we have to go.
Well, yeah, obviously.
So we came home from San Diego on Saturday, repacked our bags with fresh clothing and maybe did a load of laundry and whatever. And then Sunday morning, got in the car and drove up to Milwaukee, which is only about an hour and a half away. It's a pretty quick trip. I had called out for another day of work on Monday. So my students had 4 days without me, but it was worth it because this was at the Riverview Theater in Milwaukee. We stayed at a really cool Hilton Garden Inn that was in what had been a very important bank building back in the day. And they kept a lot of the architectural touches and even safe doors and just, it was really a really cool hotel. And we got to see the McCabe's and Banana again.
Of course.
But two things of that show are very significant to me. One is that now here they actually did Diamond Head.
Yes. Oh, it was awesome.
Stunning.
I never really thought a lot about the track on the Friends album, but oh my God, it was amazing how they performed it.
The performance had a lot more oomph, I think, than the record.
And Rob Bonfiglio just totally kicked ass on it, too.
Well, that was our first time seeing the band without Nicky Wonder.
Yeah. Nick Walusko had died earlier during that tour.
Yeah, back in
I think
August.
The first night of the tour, actually.
I think they were going to be traveling to their first venue.
Yeah.
And he
Buffalo.
passed that night. So Diamond Head was just a fantastic live performance. And God Only Knows was very emotional. I mean, more emotional than usual. Because it just, I don't know, something about the way Brian performed it just really, really got to me. It just felt like, I got the feeling that he knows that this isn't going to be forever. And it's almost like he wants to give it his all while he still can. I don't know, but, and I mean, he was still having issues physically. Like,
Yeah.
I think
Oh, yeah.
that was the first time that we did not see him walk out on the stage, that
Yeah.
the curtain rose and he's sitting there.
Yeah.
We hadn't seen that before.
No.
And he didn't walk off the stage. I think he just stood up for the final bows and that was it. It's like almost, he still wants to tour. He still wants to do this, but there's more and more limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. I still love the show. The only thing is I only like about half of Odyssey and Oracle. And I know that people are going to kill me for this, but I absolutely despise Butcher's Tale. So I decided to take a pee break during Butcher's Tale. Much to my chagrin, there was a big honking speaker right outside the bathroom so that you would not miss
so you
the
wouldn't
show.
miss
I was
the
like,
show.
"Ugh."
And then that brings us to the show that we just saw a couple weeks ago
Yes.
in Waukegan.
Waukegan.
And now
October when?
October 23rd.
October 23rd. Okay.
And the
2021.
thing about that show is, now I just said how it felt like Brian had more limitations and things, but now keep in mind, we had this great big nasty pandemic. And I really thought that Brian was just gonna hang it up, that this was gonna be it. This wasn't it.
It wasn't.
I mean, there were some shows that had been canceled that had to be rescheduled that the band was still committed to, but they scheduled additional shows. And they have a whole list of shows next summer.
Yeah.
Brian is going to turn 80 on this tour.
Yeah.
So they did this show, and there wasn't really anything. I don't think there was anything that they hadn't played before.
Nothing they necessarily didn't. Well, Long Promised Road was new.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
And the thing is, like, anytime we'd seen Blondie with the Brian's band several times. We just never mentioned him until now.
Yeah.
And we happened to see the shows in which they did not do Feel Flows, that they had been rotating in and out. This time we finally got to see that. And let me tell you, those of you who haven't seen Blondie in concert with Brian, when they bring Blondie out, it becomes the Blondie Chaplin show. And I mean that in a wonderful way.
Talk about a front man.
Oh my God, he is amazing.
He owns the stage.
Yep.
He knows how to get attention. He's an amazing guitar player, a great singer. He's a wonderful addition to Brian's show, but it's like having a year and a half at home, I think did Brian a lot of good.
Yeah.
I mean, he still was in place when the curtain went up.
Yeah.
But his voice was much stronger than we had heard in several years.
Yeah, seriously, because when the curtain went up, Brian looked like he wanted to be anywhere but on stage. He looked just totally bored out of his skull. So I'm thinking, oh no. But then when he opened his mouth to sing, and his voice came out loud and strong and perfectly on key and everything. And I just sat there thinking, wow. I got feelings from a Brian show that I hadn't experienced since, say, maybe 2000, 2001-ish.
Yeah, it was.
It was just something. It's like, wow, this is the Brian that we've always loved right
and it
here.
Just, I mean, who knows what the future holds, but I mean, after that show in 2019, I thought this might be the last time we see Brian.
I'm glad it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we had one more time, and I would not write off the possibility of, I mean, who knows? Maybe that was the last time, but
could be.
I didn't have the feeling like this is it.
And again, yeah, this is another show when the curtain went up, Brian was already on stage. I did notice that when the curtain started to go down, somebody ran onto the stage with a walker. But I'll tell you what, if this is the last time we've seen Brian, like Brian decides to hang it up or some external force decides he's going to hang it up, I'm so glad that if the show we just saw is going to be the last time that we ever saw Brian in concert, our Brian concerts ended on a very high note.
Yeah.
It was so good.
We're very fortunate as fans to have had all of these experiences. I mean, we had talked about doing this particular episode quite a while ago.
Yeah.
Even before we knew there was going to be a number 31.
Yeah.
And I'm just thankful for every single show we have had. And that's why I've seen Brian whenever I've had the opportunity, because I don't want... I mean, there is going to be a day when there are no more Brian Wilson concerts, and I don't want any regrets and saying, I wish I had gone to that show, or I should have gone, or like, I don't want that. And I feel like I have a wonderful set of memories that I can carry with me forever.
Yeah. We were just so fortunate, especially this last show. And I had heard that Brian was taking voice lessons during the pandemic, so that might also have helped him out a little bit. But yeah, we are so blessed. This has been a great, wow. This is our 4th decade of seeing Brian in concert.
Oh my God.
Yeah, think about that.
Oh, yikes.
Wow.
Yikes.
Now, think back 23 years, 1998, when we were still realistic. We knew we'd never get to see Brian. But here we are talking about 31 times. 31 times, man. And I think we should end on that note right there. So thank you all for listening. Those of you, by the way, who might miss my voice, why, I don't know, but I do other podcasts as well. I do Pie Factory podcast with my friend Jim. We talk about classic arcade games from the 80s and sometimes 90s and 70s. That comes out once a month, piefactorypodcast.com. And there's also Autobiography of a Schnook. Many times I've talked about the Beach Boys, and in fact, that story that we told about meeting Brian, I told a similar version of that story in episode 1 of Autobiography of a Schnook, schnookpodcast.com. I'll link that in the show notes at tunex.fab4it.com. So before we sign off, I just want to offer a sincere thanks to my wife, Lisa. Thank you, dear, for doing this episode with me.
Aw.
And anyway, yeah, I guess I'm Sean,
and I'm Lisa.
And we'll talk to you. I hope so. And we'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you for listening to the Tune X podcast. Please leave us a review at Apple Podcasts or iTunes.
You can hear us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and just about every other provider out there. If TuneX isn't on your favorite provider, please let us know.
You can email us at tunexpodcast@gmail.com. Our website, which includes the show notes, is tunex.fab4it.com. Fab4it is spelled F-A-B, then the number 4, then I-T.
Feel free to connect with us on social media. TuneX is on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram and Twitter, both under the handle of TuneX Podcast.
Our opening and closing theme, Melody 10, was written and performed by Scattered Frog. All other music and sounds used in this episode remain the properties of their respective copyright holders and are used for the purposes of commentary and review. No infringement is intended.
We'll see you next time, friends. Until then, don't back down from that wave.